the frequency with which things started to happen at this point in my life was getting out of control, really. And it's just so much going on. Uh, Meeting Murray and his family, his father Bill, his mother, and their housekeeper Maggie, who lived in a in-law apartment attached to the side of the house. She was in a wheelchair. That whole family was really interesting and funny. Bill was a great, tall, skinny, stooped over old man, and hard. He was a hard man, but a good man. And that family, like, I don't know, there's just they did a lot for me, and I had a lot of amazing things happen to me because of them. And I remember going up to Murray's house for the first time. The place was always a mess because Murray was all about cooking and music. That was what he did. So the house was, always filled with bacon paraphernalia, and Murray was a collector. So he had magazines, and he had records, and he had stereo equipment, and just all sorts of things laying around all the time. He was a Renaissance man. He wanted to be into everything. He enjoyed everything. Just one of those guys. And so, like, immediately, I started taking his records home and disseminating them. And I'm telling you, he had some wicked pile of music, stuff that absolutely changed the trajectory of what I was doing. Like, I got to hear, all kinds of music that I never would have found. I think Murray had some kind of a mail order deal with a company called CMH, Country Music Heritage Records. I think that's what it was called. And they put out a huge amount of bluegrass, classic bluegrass albums in the 80s, 70s, and 80s. And so I was listening to records, really great records by, like, the Osborne Brothers, Benny Martin, Don Reno, Arthur Smith, Doc Watson was in there a little bit, Eric Thompson, heard more of Crary and Norman Blake, and just, I don't know, like, there were hundreds of records that I took home, absorbed completely, and made cassette copies of them so I could take them with me. I had a Walkman I always carried with headphones, and I had that thing on my head, more often than I didn't, and I was just continually eating music, and so there was another guy that came in along about that time, and I can't even remember. It's a sin. I can't even remember where I met him. I wish I could. I can't. I know he used to hang around the set of Up Home Tonight, and this kid was a great musician. His name was Arthur Zilkowski, and he was like he sort of became a hero to me because he had a great job. He was a couple of years older than me, perhaps, I think, maybe. And he had a job on the shrimp freezer trawlers in Greenland that he'd go out for, 2 or 3 months at a time on these floating processing boats out of Japan. And he worked out there on these prawn vessels, right? These floating freezer and packaging boats. And he made a lot of money. And so he loved music. He was a wicked guitar player and banjo player. good singer and a really cool guy, another Renaissance man, right? Like he was a short little guy. He wasn't very tall, but he was into music. He was into martial arts. He was into Bruce Lee. He was just one of those guys. He drove a little Pontiac Firefly car, and he always had great guitars. When I first met him, I think he had a Larrivee that was just incredible, built by John and his wife. He later on switched to a Beneteau, Mark Beneteau, great Canadian builder. And we used to play music and hang around, and we even, I think, at one point even performed together as a duo. And there was just so much going on. Like there was, once Murray got in the scene, because Murray went to all the Bluegrass festivals, I started going to all the festivals. And the Up Home Tonight thing was, lend some credibility to what I was doing, and so he started taking me to Ardois and Black Rocks and these different festivals around the Maritimes, and I just met so many people. And another thing that happened about that time, going to those festivals, is I started to get around Ray Legier, who I think I've already mentioned. He was on Up Home Tonight with me once or twice, and he was the first guy that I ever met that was easily on par with what I was doing and beyond. He was one hell of a, in my opinion, Ray Legier is probably the best instrumentalist that ever came out of Canada. And I'll say that till the day I die. That man is a genius level player. And I feel bad because I think Ray never got his due. I don't think, really. I think he should be way more famous than he is. And perhaps he didn't want it. I don't think he really did. I think he enjoyed being a sideman, and he still does. And now that COVID-19 is going on, and pandemic and all this shit, he's kind of taken everything he's doing online as well, and sort of stepping up front a bit more, which I love to see him do. But I got a chance to hang around with him in public ways in those festivals, and came across another musician that Ray hung out with, who was best friends with, this banjo player named Frank Duty. And Frank was like Ray. Frank was one of the best banjo players in the world. This guy was just absolutely insane banjo player, shredder. And they hung out together all the time. They were the dynamic duo. And I used to, go around them and try to, hang in there with them. And I always kind of felt a little shut out because they were together all the time, and I was only seeing them once or twice a year. And I always pushed myself as hard as I could to play, as good as I could, just, in case I met those guys, I could keep up with them. And that was their influence on me. Like, they were so good that I was like, well, I might see these guys this summer. I better get where I can pick with them. One of the things that Arthur Zilkowski, young Arthur, one of the things that he instilled in me, that's probably the wrong word, because I was already just completely ate up with this premise of multi-tracking. I was making multi-track recordings in the house, in the bedroom there, with 2 and 3 2 tape decks, right? It's the only way I knew how to do it. There was no other way. Like, I got the recording bug way early from going down to Bill Schneer's place in Bridgewater and being recorded when I was about 13 years old. I was ate up with it. The idea of overdubbing, creating a whole band by myself. So I was literally, I would record a rhythm track on one tape deck, and then I'd play that back and record myself playing with that tape deck onto another tape deck, and then I would play that back and add a third thing back to the first deck. And it sounded horrible, but I was learning things. Multi-tracking was just something incredible to me, a way of controlling performance that was really cool, you know. Well, Art came back one time off of some trip, and he had bought a 4-track Yamaha cassette recorder. It utilized both sides of the tape simultaneously, so you could record 4 separate tracks. And then, of course, you could record 3 and bounce them on the one and fill the first 3 up again, and on that goes. So you could have unlimited tracks. The quality would go down substantially the more you bounced. And we started messing with that, and we started recording all kinds of things. Some of those recordings actually yet survive to this day. And we were writing, we were doing Lightfoot, we were doing Bluegrass, we were doing all sorts of things. You know, we'd get together and just work out things and harmonies. And Art and I were the same cloth. We wanted to keep learning, and we wanted to keep inventing and improve upon things that we were hearing. You know, it was just an incredibly creative time. And all through this process, I was still dealing with all the stuff at home. Mother was, Mother had calmed, I guess, quite a bit in those years. She was still a bit of a arsehole, but she didn't. There was less people around us. Bob was not living in the province, so he was in Ontario. We were here, Nova Scotia. Dave lived in Halifax and didn't come down that often. And Joe was out working, and he was in and out of the situation, a lot of the time. And so, yeah, the home life eased. School was good at that point because, like I said in the last episode, I was having a great time with music and all the people I was meeting through that at Parkview. So that was all good. And we were going to festivals. So there was one weekend Murray decided to take us down to Thomas Point Beach. And I'm going to preface this story with something interesting. I'm not going to mention any names or even where anybody of these people were from, but there was a radio show in the Maritimes in those days, a bluegrass show, and it was DJ'd by I'll just call him a preacher. Anyhow, he heard me on television, I think, or somewhere, or one of the festivals, and he began sending me mixtapes of bluegrass music he thought I should hear. And he sent me some tapes that were in the mail that were just incredible. Again, like guitar players I'd never heard, extra, Dan Crary stuff I'd never heard. Just a bunch of really good music that I learned. I learned all of it, and it helped me immensely. So when Murray took us down to Thomas Point Beach in Maine, this individual let me know that he was going to meet me down there. We'd never met. So when we got there, of course, he was there, and what a festival that was. It was incredible. It was incredible. I saw Monroe live the first time there. He was there that weekend. And a bunch of other, it was just incredible. Bill Keith was there. It was amazing. It blew my mind. We took the ferry down, and it was just an amazing weekend. And but this guy came, this radio personality came, and as soon as I saw him, I knew I was dealing with, a predator. I could tell that from my previous experiences. And sure enough, the first thing he wanted to do was take me out to eat, just me. He wasn't even interested in meeting Murray or Bill or anybody else that was with us. He wanted to take me out to lunch, for lunch. So I thought, what the hell, right? And he took me out to Brunswick, right there, right beside the festival, not far from the festival, to McDonald's. And he didn't eat. He just bought me whatever, and he sat there and watched me eat. And he was asking me all kinds of questions, and he just creeped the shit out of me. And I knew that there was something wrong there. And I don't know, he said a few things that were just really creepy, and he took me back to the festival, and I never saw him again. I just stayed away from him in droves for the rest of the weekend. Never saw him again, and never really heard from him again. And but again, I kept running into these assholes. I don't know what the hell. I don't know what caused it, but it was just. And by that time in my life, I could pick them out a mile away, and so yeah, and everybody was with me kind of observed that was a bit strange. Taking a 15-year-old boy or whatever I was at the time, 14, about 15, I think, and so anyhow, it was a great weekend, and we went back home, and then we started talking about. Murray started talking about making a record. Now, we were still like so poor. It was ridiculous. There was just no money. My mother we were living on my father's death benefits, and my mother wasn't 65 yet. And it was just a really rough time. And so the idea of putting money out to make a record, and for what? Because I had no car, I had nothing. There was just nothing. And what were we going to do with a record, and how could I promote it, and how could I get out to play more, and all these things? But Murray just sort of took the reins and went, no, we're going to do it. So he found a recording studio up in Keswick Ridge, New Brunswick. And I don't remember the name of the studio right offhand, but it was actually a Christian studio. They did gospel music mostly. So, and they were super nice guys. And I would find out when we finally got there. So then we started, talking about, well, who do we get to play on this record? And of course, my very first choice was Ray and Frank. So we got in touch with Ray Legier and Frank Duty, and we said, I'm going to make a record, and I'd like you to play on it. And so we knew I could play the bass, so we wouldn't need a bass player. So we literally got in Murray's basement. Ray and Frank came down from Moncton, and we got in Murray's basement. He had a pool table down there, amidst all the hoarding stuff he kept all over the place. And we sat in that place for a whole weekend and arranged, I think, 10 cuts. And it was in the middle of February. It was horrible weather. So we got in Murray's big Cadillac car, which was a car that I sort of learned to drive in. Murray also made sure I did that and got my license. He took me for my beginner's license because nobody else could. And got in his car, drove up and hit a snowstorm, a bad one. I think we actually did turn back, something tells me. We didn't make it. We had to come back, I think. I think that's right. And I think we postponed until, I think we waited a week maybe and tried it again. And got up there, early in the morning. We left at 3 a.m., like just in darkness. Got up there in this little remote place, and me and Ray and Frank laid down 10 beds, and then I went back and we played all the parts, and then I went back and played bass on the whole record, and then we mixed and mastered it and left there the same day. We basically made an entire record mixed and mastered in about 12 hours. And that would become my very first commercial release. This story is another great example of some of the people in my life that took great risk on me. And the way this record got made that nobody really knows is that because we had no money and Murray didn't have any liquidated capital at the time, he took his father to the bank and borrowed the money to make it. Now, mind you, it only cost, I think he borrowed, I'm not sure what he borrowed. It wasn't a lot of money, but I mean, it was a lot of money then. But it was a couple of grand he took out. He took a loan, right? And to do this. And I never asked him to do it. He just did it. And his father, Bill, Bill was pissed. Bill's like, "What are you, crazy?" You know, that was the way Bill was, right? But Bill loved me. He he was always picking on me. He was like my grandfather, you know, that if anybody was like my granddad, it would have been Bill. And but he wasn't happy about it. I remember that. He was like, "You're nuts, Murray. Like, what are you doing?" But Murray, he just I don't know if what he saw, he just knew that I needed to do something beyond what I was doing. And so he went to a bank and took all this money out on a loan, and he paid for this whole thing. And I still remember going to shoot the album cover. Joe, my brother Joe, we had a concept in mind, so we literally went to Bruce Oakes' backyard with a photographer, a fog machine, and a bunch of blue spotlights. And we shot this picture, which ended up me just being me in silhouette coming out of this blue fog. And Joe did all the graphics by hand. He drew my name and the title of the record. We expected that the album would be on vinyl, but we couldn't afford vinyl, so it only ended up being on cassette. But the name of the album was Out of the Blue. And I to be honest with you, I haven't heard the record in probably 30 years, and or 25 at least. I don't have a copy of it. I don't even remember what's on it for the most part. I remember most of it, but the reason I remember most of it is because of Ray and Frank's solos. I don't think I played very well on this record, but it is what it is, right? And it served a purpose, a big one. And I can't thank Murray enough for doing what he did. He seemed he was just one of those players in my life that he just continually looked out for me. And whether it was doing something like this, he gave me a job several times. I mean, I worked for the bakery off and on over the years. Like, I baked bread and donuts and pizzas, and I was a delivery man for him for a while. He just kept me going. You know, he knew what was going on. He'd come to the house and see my mother. My mother loved him, which was really odd. She never liked nice people. And he would always bring, squares and buns and bread and which normally would have been a massive insult to my mother because she was a baker. She was a great baker. And if people brought her that kind of stuff, she would often, it's no good, right? She never said that about Murray. She always was loved Murray, and Murray would come down and check on us. And I remember he brought us money sometime. He gave us money. He gave us food. He was just a, I don't even know how to describe him. He was just one of those guys. There was so many people in my life that, well, I say that now, but that's actually kind of bullshit. There wasn't that many. There was only a few who really went that extra mile. So I don't want to diminish what he did by diluting it with the idea that there's a lot of people that did, things for me without expecting something in return. And Murray never did. Murray never asked me for nothing. And he just, I don't know what, he just, I remember watching him watch things that were going on. And he'd get this kind of twinkle in his eye and laugh. And he got a great deal of pleasure, enjoyment out of seeing things come together. Like he had some kind of a plan. I never really knew what it was, but he guided me kind of through it until, we got this record made. And I think at some point or another, he actually sort of started to manage me unofficially. He was trying his best to get me in front of people. And but that's how it all started. That record that we drove up to the middle of nowhere, across the Mactaquac Dam, up in Keswick Ridge. I've driven past there and just thought, my God, this is remote. I didn't realize how remote it was then. And we made this record in 12 hours. And I remember the first day when the day the first box of cassettes showed up, and putting them out. Like we took them around to stores. I played some live shows, and they sold really well. We're selling them for $10 in those days. And I don't think Murray ever made his money back. I really don't. I'm not sure. I had never had money, so being able to sell something for $10, a lot of them, that was a lot of money to me. And I've always just spent money because I never had any. And I don't think he ever got his investment back. But I don't think he planned to. There was just something about Murray that was just like, he was a key figure. Back to the thing I talked about in the last video. It was kind of it's just felt meant to be. He was there to get me up those next 6 steps on the ladder. And he knew it. As far as I'm concerned, he always knew it. I could see it in the way he planned things and did things and talked about things. He was just trying to get me up and out, And he never let me down. He was always my friend. And we started that record with a tune that I was an avid reader. My mother was an avid reader, and I had a library card at the Bridgewater Library, and they started to loan out albums. And there was an album that I brought home called the Jarvis Benoit Quartet. Basically a local band out of Halifax. He was from Arishat originally. Him and his son, and Andrew Russell on the banjo, and Alex Reitzma on the bass. I almost forget his name. That record blew my mind. The arrangements on that album of traditional fiddle tunes were just astounding. I'd never heard anything like it. And these guys were very famous. They were on the CBC. They played with orchestras. And I'd never heard of them before I saw that record in the library. And one of the tunes I learned off that record, it just blew my face off, was an old Acadian reel called, well, it was Irish, but it was the French claimed it up over here, called the Temperance Reel. Kenny Baker called it the Teetotalers. But the Temperance Reel was one of the very first kind of fiddle tune, like real fiddle tunes that I played on the guitar. And that's what we kicked the record off with, because it was such a corker of a tune. And I'll never forget listening. I still have parts of that Jarvis Benoit Quartet album on my iPod, and it's really still, to this day, something to listen to. Unbelievable. It's never been duplicated. And I'm proud to say that Jarvis's son, Louis, is a good friend of mine, and I got to know Jarvis pretty good, too. Jarvis was an incredible musician. And, yeah, so that tune, the Temperance Reel, boy, it was a corker, and we had a lot of fun playing it. Ray and Frank just killed it, and there was so much energy in that first cut. I remember that about the album, putting that tape in, and when that thing started, man, it just started out with solo guitar, playing the tune, and all of a sudden, the band comes in, and the energy of it was incredible. And we cut the album in order to make things easier, right? Which was really funny. But yeah, that's how it got started. That was the first full-length recording I ever did that was sold. I wish I had a copy of it now, as I haven't seen it, and I don't even know how many copies we made. Maybe a couple thousand, or even 1,000. I don't remember. But it's a rare recording. If you have a copy of it, boys, hold on to it, because there's never going to be another one. We don't know where the master went. We don't know anything about that album, what happened to it. But it certainly changed things for me.